When it comes to battery life, Huawei's P30 and P30 Pro have pretty much every factor in their favour. And I've managed to get both devices, making this the most important battery comparison we've ever made. We're effectively fitting two whole battery comparisons into one video here. We've got the standard mainline flagship phones from Huawei, Apple and Samsung, but then also their Pro plus size variants. So right now I'm using a luxometer to make sure the brightness is completely calibrated between the different screens. They might look a little different here, but that's because the angle they have from the camera. And off we go. I've unplugged the cables, and the first thing we're going to do is continuous Skype calling. If you take a look at the battery capacities at the bottom, you can probably tell Huawei isn't messing around here. The P30 Pro, out of all the plus size smartphones, has the largest battery capacity at 4,200 mAh. But what is interesting is that it almost looks like they've made it a mission to beat their competitors in every category of phone. For the standard-sized P30, you can see it's got quite a bit more battery than the iPhone XS and the Galaxy S10, on paper. Alright, so we're 40 minutes in, which is a little early to say anything conclusive, but so far it's looking like Team Huawei on the far left is winning. In fact, the P30, the standard smaller P30, is currently beating every other smartphone out here. Right now we're just on YouTube, and we're watching some of the other Mr. Who's the Boss coverage of this phone, and we'll leave it on this for about 30 minutes or so. Let's see what videos we end up on. One thing worth noting is the measures we've had to take to try and make this as fair a test as possible. All phones have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, NFC, as well as location turned on. And for all four Android phones here, we haven't touched the resolution setting. We've just kept it on the default 1080p that most people will use out the box. The other really important thing is that we're testing phones that haven't been used yet. When you use a phone as your main device, you're constantly draining the battery day in, day out, and these continuous charging cycles degrade its overall capacity. And so, none of the devices you're seeing here have been fully charged and discharged more than 10 times. And so even the S10 Plus you're seeing here is a different S10 Plus to the one I reviewed, just to make sure that we're getting the best battery life out of each phone. We've now switched from news and social media to something slightly more intense. We're running F1 Mobile, a racing game, and we are starting to see some trends when it comes to battery. The two iPhones are starting to slip behind a little bit, and the standard smaller Galaxy S10 has lost a lot of battery compared to its larger counterpart. If you compare that with the P30 and the P30 Pro, well, the standard smaller P30 is actually slightly ahead. That may well change over the course of the test, but nonetheless, so far this is an exceptional result. The Galaxy S10 Plus, at least when it comes to continuous screen-on time, is incredible. We did a battery test earlier this year when it came out, and it was the leader. It beat out every current-gen flagship smartphone. So if the Huawei beats that, then that's really something. We've just passed the 3-hour mark, and with this in mind, all 6 flagship phones are doing well for battery life. None of these are gonna disappoint, although on a relative level, the iPhone XS and the Galaxy S10 have fallen quite a way behind. This starts to build the kind of picture we were expecting, given that the standard S10 has a reasonably sized but not particularly large 3,400 mAh battery. Mind you, that looks like a very generous figure next to the iPhone XS's 2,658 mAh, but Apple's iOS, and this is the latest iOS, is just very efficient at managing limited battery capacity. I'd be interested to see how well these iPhones would perform if they were bundled in with equivalently sized batteries. Alright, we've got Facebook open right now, we're just watching endless, pretty useless videos, and we're going to close it down and open up the camera. We're going to focus on 4K video recording, something that all phones here can do, but mind you, the latest two Huawei flagships can't do 4K video at 60 frames per second. All 4 other phones can, so for the sake of parity, we're just going to record 4K 30 on all. This does big damage to the standard Galaxy S10, which is now clinging on to 30%. And that's crazy because the Galaxy S10 Plus is still on over 50 after over 4 hours of screen on time. Worth bearing in mind, whilst, don't get me wrong, the Huawei P30 phones are cutting edge in many ways, they are built on the same chip as the Mate 20 Pro last year. And it's a super efficient chip, so it's not a bad thing, but it just means that any battery efficiency gains that you see on this phone versus that one are most likely due to two things. Firstly, both P30 phones ship with MUI 9.1, a slightly more refined version of the software the Mate 20 Pro released with. The company said that one of the features of this new software is that the phones will better be able to anticipate your behaviors. And if you think about it, if your smartphone can successfully predict your behavior, then in theory it should be able to allocate resources efficiently ahead of time. and so that would explain some battery saving. The other thing is resolution. Whilst the Apples and the Samsungs have a maximum resolution well above 1080p, both Huawei flagships are limited to this figure, which I was kind of surprised by. I feel like a 2019 flagship should be able to go up to a Quad HD Plus resolution. Nonetheless, we are now well past the 5-hour mark, what I'd call the safe zone. Any smartphone that lasts over 5 hours of screen on time is what I'd consider acceptable. And so, even though the iPhone XS was the first to go, and in fact the Galaxy S10 has just gone as well, they're both okay. The battery life won't amaze you, but more importantly, it won't be a concern, not at least for the first year or so of using them. Also, if you've been checking the figures, this test is getting seriously close. It's probably the closest test we've ever done, between the P30 Pro, which by the way has overtaken its smaller sibling now, and the S10 Plus. They're literally completely neck and neck. The iPhone XS Max has just called it a day, which is good news for Huawei. It's nice to see that they've shared the battery love between their standard size phone and their plus size model. The fact that they've got this more compact phone that can still outlast the supposed max variants of other companies is really cool. Okay, so we're nearing the end of this test. I'm going to put this last section on fast forward and we're going to get straight to the final results. In 6th place, the iPhone XS, with a result of nearly 5 hours and 20 minutes, which is kind of just above what I'd consider acceptable. The Galaxy S10 lasted about 15 minutes longer than that, which is fine, but at the same time it's a shame to see it so heavily hindered compared to the amazing S10 Plus. The iPhone XS Max finished at a fraction under 6 hours, which I'm pretty happy with, it's good performance. But I was really surprised by the P30, which managed to last a good 45 minutes longer than the XS Max, and that's the kind of difference you would notice on a day-to-day basis. In 2nd place, the Galaxy S10 Plus, with over 7 hours of screen on time. And I've said this before, but this thing is an absolute tank when it comes to battery life. But that means we've got a new battery king, the Huawei P30 Pro, which lasted over 7 hours and 20 minutes. Wow, I'm incredibly impressed.